So in the introduction, this is on page 15 in Roman numerals. He has a good point here about what the old university and what it used to do and believe as a virtue. So it says here that in the universities there's been this moving out of the Western tradition of objectivity and unbiased inquiry. And now what has occurred is that education should encompass all cultures and should value all equally. And where the old university had tried to be an ivory tower of unbiased knowledge, outside and above politics, teaching and research now were politicized and treated as instruments of popular reform. So I think that's a really good point. If we can theoretically have a university and a research that is unbiased and objective and not interested necessarily in how the information of the research would be to be used, but if we do not conceive research in that way, if that is not our purpose, then all research, and this is probably a quote from somebody, then all research is a kind of activism. Because we're on a philosophical terrain here when we say or when we argue that all inquiry is biased and there is no such thing as objectivity. If we concede it, if we accept it, that means that the intellectual scene must necessarily be at war with opposing sides. And if you are an academic and you accept that, then you are in a power struggle. So the first point I want to make is that this does not necessarily need to be the case. This is research being a power struggle, or even truth being a power struggle, is inherent in the idea of objectivity being impossible. It's not a necessity. It is a conclusion of a kind of epistemology. So if you agree, I think many academics accept this, they necessarily become radicals. At least those are the kinds of people that are hired. Those are the people that will be more successful in this kind of environment. The environment being a war zone. And now everyone, all academics, are now fighting for a cause, because if you can't be objective, if no one is objective, then everyone then must wear all their biases as explicitly as they can. And now you get all of the race groups, all of the gender groups, mostly female, though mostly feminist, the gay rights groups, even in the universities, and you have centers created that are devoted to a certain biased form of research. But remember, biases is not a vice. It is, to them, it is an accepted conclusion. It is what things have to be. And so necessarily all of their work becomes pervasive in that bias to fight other biases. So you see how when you accept, some people think that philosophy, it doesn't matter that much. But you see how a small conclusion, a little alteration in one's epistemology necessarily creates all this mess and this big war zone. And so this is on the next page, and it's a good big paragraph. And I think it's actually worth reading, and you'll see what I mean, what I just discussed, but you'll see it more explicit now. So on the next page, I'll quote, "The shifts of these huge tectonic plates, demographic, cultural, technological, inevitably affected all older conceptions of the primary product of higher education, knowledge. We have, therefore, to speak of a fourth major shift, an epistemological one, which tended, like the other revolutions, in a democratic direction by questioning established authority and empowering a much wider intellectual competence, absolute knowledge, essentialism, and traditional concepts of what we can know and who can know it were questioned at all levels. Science set the scene with relativity theory, fractals, and the uncertainty principle, but in the latter half of the century, deconstruction, the most descriptive name for the much broader postmodernist movement in theory, took uncertainty to its nihilistic extremes in the humanities and social sciences, demystifying traditional knowledge, replacing positivism with relativism, substituting interpretation for facts, and discrediting objectivity in the name of subjectivity." And what he says just after that is that what has happened is that we've created what he calls a democratic university. And he says that this is not a catastrophe, but he does say that, and I'll quote here, but things will not be the same ever again as they once were, and this entails loss as well as gain. And just at the very end of the introduction, he makes a quick little point about the English department. He's quoting a publisher, I guess, and this publisher says, if you want to know what is actually disturbing a university, visit its English department. And then the author says, and whatever its status as an academic subject, literary studies has been an excellent point from which to observe the conflicting views at work in the universities in the latter half of the 20th century. And I actually encourage you to look up a random university and go to their English department on their website and look at their faculty and just look at their CVs and look at the kind of stuff they published. I think the titles of which you will be horrified.